Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to talk about the Rust shooting case and how a new report could mean that Alec Baldwin could still see jail. So the background on this is that charges against Alec Baldwin in this matter were dismissed, but they were dismissed without prejudice, which means that the prosecution can still refile them. The reason why they were dismissed was that they said, listen, there might be some issues with the gun, and we can't necessarily say for certain, so we're going to have to do some more investigation. We need to know if it's possible that this gun went off on its own, or if Alec Baldwin had to pull the trigger. And until we know that, we can't proceed with charges against Mr. Baldwin. Now, they were still proceeding with charges against Hannah Gutierrez Reed. And so now we've got a new report. They just finished a report, and we've just now got a copy of it that says basically they did some more investigation on the gun. So let's have a look at this report. I'm not going to go through all of it. I will probably go through it in full detail on a live soon, but let's just look at the critical aspects here. All right, so this is the illustrated report of August 2nd in the matter of State of New Mexico and Hannah Gutierrez Reed. And this was prepared by Lucien C. Hogg of Forensic Science Services Incorporated. Now they're going to start out by giving us a little bit of background. So introduction. This file was first opened on March 17, 2023, upon the electronic receipt of a number of PDF documents. A large box containing 5 large binders of documents was subsequently received on April 12, 2023. Additional documents, digital images, and video files were received in the weeks and months to follow. Now, the reason why I'm going over this is because this is going to tell us all of the things that they considered in making this report. So all of the information that goes into it. So these included the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office investigation report, the autopsy report for Helena Hutchins, who was unfortunately killed, jailhouse interviews of Hannah Gutierrez Reed, Alec Baldwin, Dave Hall, Seth Kenney, and Sarah Zachary, OSHA interviews of Hannah Gutierrez Reed, Alec Baldwin, Dave Hall, Seth Kenney, Reed Russell, and Sarah Zachary. An interview of Alec Baldwin by George Stephanopoulos on December 3rd, 2021. When he gave that interview to the press, lots of us said, oh my God, what is he doing? Because there's no reason why the police can't use that interview that you give to the press against you. And the rule of keep your mouth shut applies not just to in the police, but also with the media. So right here, you can see they looked at that. They considered it. This is part of the case against him. So a telephonic interview of Thel Reed by Detective Hancock, transcribed January 25th, 2023. A November 29th, 2021 interview of Sarah Zachary by Detective Hancock. And on April 19th, 2023, 2 videos were received depicting actor Alec Baldwin in Western garb, quick drawing a long-barreled single-action revolver and pointing it in the general direction of the video camera. A transcript of an April 20th, 2023 interview of Seth Kenney by Detective Hancock. Now, if you're wondering what those videos are, those are the videos from the fateful day. Those are the videos where Helena Hutchins was killed, where Alec Baldwin was practicing his draw. Okay, so it continues on. And again, we're not going to read the full thing, but this initial bit is information rich. This incident involves the fatal shooting of Helena Hutchins and wounding of Joel Souza that occurred on October 21st, 2021, around 1:30 p.m., during a practice rehearsal on the Rust movie set near Santa Fe, New Mexico. Actor Alec Baldwin was handling a .45 Colt caliber prop revolver manufactured by the Pieta Company of Gossago, Italy, while seated on a pew in a mock church. I'm just going to stop here and note that a prop revolver doesn't mean a fake revolver. A prop revolver just means a revolver that's used on a set. Pieta makes real guns. This is a real gun. It's just a real gun that's for use in this movie. The rehearsal involved a close-up scene in which he was to quickly draw the revolver from a holster inside his coat and bring it into a forward-pointing shooting position. At some point during the session, Mr. Baldwin retracted the external hammer on this revolver while it was pointed in the direction of Miss Hutchins, behind who was standing Mr. Souza. That's an awkward phrasing, but I think we get what they're saying. A live cartridge in the revolver was discharged by a means presently in dispute. That's what the court case is going to try to solve, resulting in a fatal perforating gunshot wound to Miss Hutchins and a non-fatal penetrating gunshot wound to Mr. Souza. So perforating, it went through and through. Penetrating, it went in, and the bullet was later recovered from Mr. Souza at the hospital, which actually turns out to be the next line of this report. Now, I mentioned that, these are real guns, and so far they've mentioned that this is a .45 Colt caliber Pietta revolver. They haven't yet mentioned, but it's a model 1873, and I actually happen to have one right here. Now, the reason why I have this is actually because of the rust shooting. I bought this so that I could do some checking of my own, make sure I completely understand this firearm. And I just want to note, because I'm using this in a video, this gun is unloaded, and every direction that this is being pointed in is a safe direction. But you can see, and I'll just tilt it a little bit so you can see there's no brass there. We've got one cylinder, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is a 6-shooter, so we've just checked every cylinder, but we'll just check a little more just in case I can't count. That's how easy it is to check one of these if it's unloaded, just by the way. All right, so I'm going to keep this on hand because at several points they're going to be talking about elements of this gun, and I want to be able to show those to you as we go. All right. Matters to be addressed. The issues presented to this writer, so these are the questions that this report is trying to answer, were the operation and condition of the incident Pietta Model 1873 revolver at the time of the incident, i.e., was it in good repair? How it was discharged? How did it fire? Did Baldwin pull the trigger, or did this thing just fire on its own? Because if it was capable of firing on its own without his finger on the trigger, then Baldwin's culpability in this is much lower. And in fact, probably you would never get a criminal conviction in that case. The source of the live cartridge, which is a big question. Where did live cartridges come from on this set? Whether it could be distinguished from the various types of dummy cartridges employed in the Rust production, and whether the evidence bullet and fired cartridge case were of the same design as the live ammunition recovered from the Rust movie set. Now, primarily, I'm going to be looking at the issues with respect to Alec Baldwin, i.e., could this gun go off without his finger on the trigger? That's the big issue, because if the answer to that is no, then they will probably relay charges, and Baldwin is back at risk of going to jail over this one. There's not a lot of jail at stake, but there's at least some. Okay. Now, they're going to give us the physical evidence receipt. This is all the stuff that they took in, and there's a big long list of cartridges that we're not going through. However, we are going to look at the evidence revolver. So the evidence revolver, Santa Fe Sheriff's Office, item number 1, is an Italian manufactured facsimile of the Colt 1873 single-action revolver chambered for the .45 Colt cartridge and made by the Pietta firm in Gusago, Italy, and imported by EMF in Santa Ana, California. So exactly like this gun here. Now, when they say facsimile, they don't mean fake. What they mean is that this is a real gun. It just is a real gun that is modeled after the 1873. It's not an original 1873, but yeah, if you put live cartridges in this gun, it will fire. I have shot it at the range. It shoots just fine. So this revolver was inoperative upon receipt from the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office property facility on July 3rd, 2023 at 10:30 a.m. Subsequent disassembly of this revolver on July 6, 2023 revealed that the full cock step on the hammer had been severely damaged, the top of the trigger sear was broken off, and the bolt cylinder stop was also broken. Why did it have all of this damage? Well, when they first got it, one of the first things that they wanted to do was to test and see if it could be fired without pulling the trigger. And so they tried to do that. And in fact, they tested it to failure. They were hitting it with mallets to see if that would do it. And eventually they broke it without being able to get it to fire without pulling the trigger. Now, they also mention here full cock. And I'm going to try to explain that without giggling. Okay, so we're going to, here we've got our revolver. And as you can see right now, the hammer is all the way down. But if I pull it back a little bit, and I'm going to move it closer to the mic here so that hopefully you can hear this. All right, you heard that click, I hope. And so now you can see that there's a little gap between the hammer and the revolver. And in fact, if I pull this back, you can see that it just drops and doesn't impact. It doesn't actually strike the cartridge. So that's an important safety feature, because if you've got this in a holster or something, you don't want it where the hammer could be brushed back and then drop and fire a cartridge. So instead, if it gets dropped back, it won't fire a cartridge. This is, again, a critical safety feature, and it's found on this gun. Now, the next step, if we pull it back a little further, is half cock. And you can see now there's a much bigger gap. You can actually see the firing pin. Now, half cock, again, prevents it from just dropping and firing like that, but it also allows us to freely move the cylinder. This is important because once you, this allows you to open the loading gate and you can check and see if it's loaded. You could put cartridges in there if it's not loaded. And if it does have cartridges, you can eject them. It's actually got this little slidey thing that manipulates this little arm. So you can see this little arm shoving things out, that little pokey finger basically, to knock out spent cartridges or live cartridges. So you can knock out empty brass, or you can knock out live cartridges for the purposes of unloading it. All of those things are done at the half cock stage. Now the next step is full cock. So now you can see it's way back, and this is where the gun is ready to fire. Now we've already confirmed multiple times that this is unloaded, so you can see that that causes it to fire. If there were a live cartridge here, that would have put a hole in my wall, and my wife would have been very unhappy because now we need a drywaller. All right, so let's go back and carry on here, now that we understand those sort of critical concepts. So now we've got the evidence revolver as they received it, and you can see they sent it in a cardboard box with holes in it that they used to zip tie it in place. The zip ties here aren't for security. They're just to make sure that nothing gets lost in transit. So you've got the frame of the revolver, you've got the cylinder of the revolver there, and then they note that the broken parts are in a sealed packet. Then we've got the broken parts. So there's the bolt, a bolt piece that came off it, and the tip of the trigger. So all of that was in the packet taped to the inside of the evidence box. They also have this, which is a comparison. This is the broken trigger from the evidence revolver and the reference trigger. And the reference trigger is just a new trigger. This is a replacement part. So we're going to get to the replacement parts aspect right away. So this revolver was returned to service for test firing and function tests by installing a new bolt purchased by this writer and the trigger and hammer from a new unfired Pieta 1873-45 Colt single-action revolver owned by Michael Hogg of Forensic Science Consultants of Albuquerque, New Mexico, that's their company. So basically, they say, we bought a new bolt, we swapped that in, we took a hammer and a trigger out of a gun we already owned and swapped those in, no problem. So this is just replacement parts, right? Now, upon reassembly, the evidence revolver was found to function properly and in accordance with the operational design of original Colt 1873 single-action revolvers. This included the timing and alignment of the cylinder and one of its 6 chambers with the axis of the barrel, just as the retracting of the revolver's external hammer was manually drawn to the full cock position. Okay, so let's talk about what timing and alignment means. So you've got your revolver, and in order for it to fire, the firing pin has to actually impact on a cartridge. And so that means that you need this to line up properly. You need that that the cylinder lines up each chamber with the barrel each time you draw it back. Now, with a single action revolver like this, you can see that when you pull this back, it turns it. And if you've got everything properly timed and aligned, then it should be that each time you do that, it's actually lining up one of the chambers with the barrel. So mine seems to be working fine too. Okay, carrying on. An untoward discharge of a live cartridge during a loss of control of the hammer during manual retraction process before reaching the fully cocked position was thwarted by the hammer being captured in either the half-cock loading notch or the quarter-cock safety notch in the hammer, as long as the trigger is not being depressed during this process. What they mean by that, again, is that let's say you are, and you see finger off the trigger, let's say you're drawing this back and you slip, and here we're just let's say you're drawing it back and you've almost got it to the full cock position, but you slip. Well, it doesn't fire, it drops into half cock. And if it doesn't drop into half cock, then it drops into quarter cock. Both of those are designed to prevent that exact situation. However, let's say I'm an idiot and I do have my finger on the trigger and it doesn't take a whole lot of force. It's a very gentle thing here. And then I slip, then that would go bang. So that's what they're saying is if your finger's on the trigger, then the safety features don't work, because of course you're trying to pull the gun or trying to fire the gun. That's what the gun thinks anyway. And if you're not, then it just won't fire in those positions. So these two intermediate hammer positions, the half cock or load position and the quarter cock safety position, were also found to function properly. No push off with the replacement hammer at the fully cocked position occurred when pressure was applied to the back of the hammer spur, i.e. you couldn't push it forward. The four positions of the hammer in properly functioning Pietta 1873 revolvers are shown in figure 2. Now, I already showed you this with mine, but they've got the hammer fully forward, hammer at half cock, at 1/4 cock there, where it's just the little edge, that's to the upper right. And then to the lower left here, hammer at 1/2 cock, so you can see that, and then hammer fully cocked. And in fact, you can see it looks like not only was this gun the same make and model and design and all of that, it looks like it's even a very similar finish. I think it's just lighting that is, so yeah, the finish is just the pattern on it. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit here. They did some tests on the trigger pull, and they found that the trigger pull for this gun was 1.9 pounds plus or minus 0.3 pounds, which was in close agreement with the typical result of 2 to 2.5 pounds. So that was from the FBI laboratory result. And they also checked a bunch of other revolvers and found that it was basically the same category. So the trigger pull on it was normal. All right, now we're going to skip over a bunch of the stuff with the ammunition. I'm going to go over this on a live stream in detail, but for right now, I just want to focus in on the critical aspects. Now, one thing I will mention about the ammunition is this weird bit. So they fired, they're looking at the evidence bullet recovered from Joel Souza. So this was the fatal bullet. And they note that it has experienced substantial terminal ballistic damage and deformation, some of which appears to be the consequence of its passage through a heavily fouled bore, to the extent that only remnants of the rifle marks were present on one side of the bearing surface of this bullet. What they mean is that this gun was filthy. It was in poor maintenance. Nobody had been cleaning this gun. The surviving rifling impressions were so indistinct that neither a land and groove count nor a measurement of land widths was possible. What they're talking about there is rifling. The rifling is sort of carved into the barrel of the gun and essentially is designed to spin the bullet in the same way that you might spin a football to throw it, I'm told. But in this case, the gun was so filthy that it looks like the rifling was probably just full of garbage and didn't actually do much for this particular bullet. This would have been a very inaccurate gun. It actually takes a lot of work to get a gun this filthy. So the most that could be determined was that of a right hand twist, which the evidence revolver possesses. So we're not really going to be able to match this other than to say the only information we've got doesn't say it's not a match. This passage through a heavily fouled bore appears to have resulted in an extrusion effect, which has reduced and altered the diameter of this .45 caliber bullet to minimum and maximum values of 0.43 inches to 0.44 inches. I.e., this gun was so filthy that the barrel was actually narrowed and the lead was kind of pushed through it like sausage meat going in. It's this was not great. An armorer's job includes maintenance of the firearms, just so we're aware. So all of this suggests that Hannah Gutierrez Reed needed to clean her guns sometimes. And the reason why this wasn't a big deal beforehand is because these are not guns normally used to fire a cartridge. So I'm guessing cleaning it wasn't really a big priority. But still, yuck. The general design has survived and is that of a hard-cast lead round nose point bullet with a single deep lubricating groove cannelure approximately 1 or 0.1 inch forward of the bullet flat base. So that big groove you see at the back there. Faint traces of an upper crimping groove could also be seen on several areas of the evidence bullet. Two views of this bullet appear in figure 6A and 6B. So that crimping groove that they're talking about, you can see it's about halfway along the bullet, that little indent there. That's what they're mentioning. That's where the casing is gripping the thing. All right. And you can see this thing just got battered. I don't know what's going on in the bore of that thing, but all right, so we can note here these are some live cartridges from the Rust movie set. This looks very similar. This 7A, similarly 7B looks pretty much like what we're talking about here, and you can see just how much damage that bullet had to go through. 8B, or 8C, you can see once again very similar. 9A, very similar again. If you dial back all of the damage. 9B, very similar. All of these are found from the movie set. However, we've got some ones that weren't found from the movie set that we're going to have a look at here. And those were the ones collected from Seth Kenney. And Seth Kenney, a bunch of people had said, hey, we think Seth Kenney might be involved in this in some fashion. Well, look at the bullets that Seth Kenney has got. 200 grain semi-wad cutter bullet, completely different shape. 235 truncated cone bullet, again, very different shape. He's got different bullet shapes here. And you might be wondering, why would you have these different bullet shapes? Well, that is for scoring on paper. That is for ballistic reasons in the air. That's for reasons of when something impacts. There's all sorts of reasons for that, and that's beyond the scope of this video. Okay, so we've got a partial answer to our question here about the issue of could Alec Baldwin's gun have gone off without him pulling the trigger? And so far the answer looks like a no, but it's going to get more emphatically no. So summary, observations, and opinions. The Pieta M8 1872, which I think is 1873 evidence revolver, typo. This item was inoperative upon receipt, but was returned to proper operating condition following the replacement of the gun's hammer, trigger, /sear, and bolt. These three parts were dimensionally indistinguishable from and fully interchangeable with the broken parts. This is critical. They're saying, listen, we compared them with the broken parts, and they're the same shape. Nothing has been modified. And the reason why that matters is because there was some suggestion that maybe the trigger or sear had been modified to make this a hair trigger gun. And here they're saying, no, we checked that. Nothing was filed off on the original, everything was just factory shape. So once installed, the evidence revolver was found to function properly and in accordance with the original Colt 1873 single-action revolver. This included the timing and alignment of the cylinder in one of its 6 chambers with the axis of the barrel, just as the retracting of the revolver's external hammer was manually drawn to the full cock position. The half-cock and quarter-cock positions on the original hammer and the substitute hammer were intact and fully capable of fulfilling their intended purposes of providing a loading position and a safety position for the hammer. So basically, these things prevent this tragedy from happening the way Baldwin says it happened. Baldwin is full of crap, is what this sentence means. They also provide a means of capturing the retracted hammer in situations where there's a loss of control, grasp of the hammer during the manual retraction process before reaching the fully cocked position or during a failed attempt to lower a previously cocked hammer. So basically, couldn't have happened the way he said it did. The average force in pounds necessary to discharge this firearm with replacement parts was found to be 1.9 pounds for 6 measurements with the trigger scan device. And so that's just how much force it takes to pull the trigger. What kind of trigger pull is required? These tests yielded an average trigger pull value of 1.9 plus or minus 0.3 pounds, with the highest result at 2.3 pounds and the lowest result at 1.7 pounds. This 1.9 pound value is in close agreement with the FBI laboratory value of 2 to 2.5 pounds. So the FBI measured it a little higher, maybe, and I'm not sure why. But it's not a significant difference. It's a trivial difference. It's also in good agreement with the 2.1 plus 0.6 pounds average for the 9 impounded Pietta 45 caliber single action revolvers. They had a bunch of other guns to compare it with. They compared it. It's basically the same. Now, the amount of rearward trigger movement necessary to release the hammer from its full cock position and fire a live cartridge was approximately 0.1 inches. It does not take a lot of trigger movement. And this is really, really critical to understanding this. When you've got this is the trigger, and then, trigger, finger on trigger. That motion is all it takes to fire it. Now I'm going to turn this around here so you can see, and then that's all the way back. Now it'll fire actually before it goes all the way back. So if we pull this there, you can see. So just, yeah, once it breaks that tension, it fires. It doesn't take a lot of movement. This value was in close agreement with that of a new Pietta M1873 single action revolver, 0.11 inches, and noticeably greater than the 0.068 inch average for the 9 impounded Pietta single action revolvers. Now, defense might try to spring on this, but I don't think they're going to make a whole lot of headway. But I would be trying to focus in on this difference to say, oh, well, isn't it possible that it was, more of a hair trigger than you thought it was? I don't think it's going to get them anywhere, but I suspect they're going to try. Summary. The fired evidence cartridge is the consequence of a normal hammer fall from the fully cocked position of the hammer. So what they mean by that is that based on the evidence from looking at the cartridge, from the fatal shot, it was a normal pulling of the trigger, not some weird thing that had happened. And we can go over that on another video, but yeah. So evidence bullet, this fired cast lead bullet has experienced substantial terminal ballistic damage, i.e. damage from when the bullet hits something. Because, a bullet is lead typically. There's other materials, but, it might be lead and then a copper jacket over that and various other kinds of materials. But in this case, it looks like it's just lead. And so lead is pretty soft. When it hits something, it gets damaged as well. So terminal ballistic damage and deformation. It is consistent with having been fired through a heavily fouled bore to the extent that it possesses a slightly reduced diameter and only shows remnants of the firearm's rifling marks on one side of the bearing surface of the bullet. Again, these guns were gross. They were not clean. The general design features which have survived discharge and impact with 2 gunshot victims are that of a hard cast lead round nose flat point bullet with a single deep lubricating curve of approximately 0.1 inch forward of the bullet's flat base and faint surviving traces of an upper crimping groove. And they note that This item is similar to the bullets from the 5 previously disassembled live cartridges that they found in various places on the movie set, and is dissimilar to the bullets in the ammunition obtained from Seth Kenney. So, what does that tell us? This didn't come from Seth Kenney. This came from somewhere else. I know a lot of initial reports were putting blame on Seth Kenney. Not accurate. I think we can rule out Seth Kenney. The fatal incident. From an examination of the fired cartridge case and the operationally restored evidence revolver, this fatal incident was the consequence of the hammer being manually retracted to its fully rearward position and cock position followed at some point by the pull or rearward depression of the trigger. The only conceivable alternative, so basically what that means is that, and I haven't been showing you the text, but I've been reading it to you, so hopefully we'll just keep going. So what they're saying here is that at some point, the hammer was manually pulled back, and then the trigger was pulled. That's what happened. That's what this is very much saying. The only conceivable alternative to the foregoing, and I'll put this up here, would be a situation in which the trigger was already pulled or held rearward while retracting the hammer to its full cock position. Although unlikely and totally contrary to the normal operation of these single-action revolvers, such improper handling would result in the discharge of a live cartridge. So what are they talking about here? What does that look like? Well, instead of having my finger here as I pull the hammer back and then firing, instead I put my finger on the trigger. And I'll just note, if you're trying to pull this back, it's actually kind of challenging to do so when your finger is on the trigger without pulling the trigger. So you should not have your finger on the trigger except when you mean to fire the gun. But if you are pulling the trigger, if you're holding the trigger down, say you've got a tight grip, you're holding the trigger, and you'll note it doesn't fire like this, right? So you wouldn't notice necessarily that you've pulled the trigger down. But then when you pull it back and you let it slip, that would cause a cartridge to fire. Now, he says, although unlikely and totally contrary to the normal operation of these single-action revolvers, I'm just going to note, this is actually used as a technique with these things. The technique is called fanning. And basically, if you're in a gunfight, you're going hammer back, fire, hammer back, fire. That's slow. Let's say you want it to fire a little faster. Well, hammer down. That's fanning. And I've got the trigger down. I pull the hammer back, and each time it'll fire. Baldwin had said that he was practicing fanning. So it is entirely conceivable that Baldwin has this gun at his side, draws it, and then fans it. And that gets you the fatal shot as well. So that is entirely possible. I disagree with this expert when they say, although unlikely and totally contrary, because Baldwin has said that he was practicing fanning, which tells us something. So, at the moment of discharge, the evidence revolver was pointed at Helena Hutchins, behind whom was Joel Souza. The bullet passed completely through Helena Hutchins, then nearly passed through Joel Souza, ending up just under the skin of his back, from which it was removed at the hospital. Ugh. Although Alec Baldwin repeatedly denies pulling the trigger, given the tests, findings, and observations reported here, the trigger had to be pulled or depressed sufficiently to release the fully cocked or retracted hammer of the evidence revolver. If the hammer had not been fully retracted to the rear and were to slip from the handler's thumb without the trigger depressed, the half-cock or quarter-cock notches in the hammer should have prevented the firing pin from reaching any cartridge in the firing chamber. I would say would have. If these features were somehow bypassed, a conspicuously off-center firing pin impression would result. And we didn't see that, therefore it wasn't bypassed. 3 frames from one of the videos submitted to this writer on April 19th, 2023, and 2 frames from a second video received on that same date are useful in evaluating his account of the incident. I.e., when they say this, what they mean is, let's go to the video because we're going to call BS on Alec Baldwin. we're going to say that Alec Baldwin is full of crap here. Figures 21A, 21B, and 21C show Mr. Baldwin cocking the silver-colored hammer of a long-barreled revolver with his right index finger ending up on or near the trigger. This description of the revolver in the video corresponds to the evidence revolver. So you've got here, they note thumb on hammer spur, note the silver color of hammer, hammer partially retracted. And you can see, I'm just going to show you with my gun again. Proper way to do this is your finger should be here. Here. Where's Baldwin's finger? It looks like it's here somewhere. It's either in the trigger guard on the trigger or it's perilously close. You know, this, if I saw somebody doing this at the range, I'd kick them off. Like if I brought somebody to the range and their finger was there and they're not pointed at the target that they're about to shoot, they're done for the day. That's not, you know, we're not doing that. This is unsafe gun handling. So now we've got another picture here. Thumb on hammer spur, hammer silver visible, cylinder has rotated, and there's a little yellow thing that says finger appears to be on the trigger. Again, you can see in that shot, he's got, you know, his finger is not up on the frame where it should be. It is instead, you know, it should be here, but instead it looks like it's down here. That, again, is improper, unsafe gun handling. All right, let's, so yeah, not here, but instead it looks like it's down there. There's one more here from this same snippet. Thumb on hammer spur, hammer silver visible, cylinder has rotated further. And again, they note finger appears to be on the trigger, and that is 100% clear. You can't see his finger on the frame, so where else is it? All right. Figures 22A and 22B, taken from the second video, shows two frames from two fast draw demonstrations in which Mr. Baldwin's right index finger is inside the trigger guard and either on or near the trigger, which is where it has no business being. His thumb is not in contact with the hammer. So you see, first fast cross draw, because he was practicing his cross draw, and they note index finger on trigger. You can see his finger is in the trigger guard. You can see that the trigger guard actually, you know, that there's the pink color of his finger on either side. So, you know, demonstrating that here, you know, he does the fast draw, and instead of his finger being here, it's here. So you can see the, you know, the finger on both sides. That is not a safe, not a safe position at all, especially when you're pointed at Helena Hutchins. So second fast cross draw. Once again, index finger is clearly on the trigger. So all of this very much tells us that the opinion of this writer is that that Mr. Baldwin had his finger on the trigger, that he pulled the trigger either accidentally, which, you know, it might be an accident, but it's an accident from carelessness. And not all accidents are innocent. You know, you can say, I had a car accident, and therefore, you know, and it's a tragic circumstance. Well, you can still go to jail for a car accident if, you know, if it turns out that that car accident was caused, and again, you know, it's an accident in the sense of you didn't intend to run anyone over, but if you're 6 beers in and you're driving, you know, you're showing off by saying, I can drive blindfolded, you know, and you're behaving in a very dangerous fashion in that way, then you're going to be held responsible for that accident. Here, if we've got Baldwin's finger on the trigger in these draws, that was improper. That's unsafe. And Baldwin should have known that if he'd properly paid attention in his safety briefings, which we've heard he didn't. We've heard he was on his phone. We've heard he just didn't care about those safety briefings. Now, the further issue is that, quite frankly, you know, if you're there and you're the armorer, if she was present, we've heard she might have been removed from that room, you know, like if you see somebody draw and their finger's on the trigger, it's like, whoa, 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 stop. We're doing some remedial safety training here. This is, this is a big deal. This is why it's important to have armorers, right? So that they can say things like, whoa, we're not doing this. This is unsafe. This is not good. Somebody could die. And somebody did die. So ultimately, I think that this gives the prosecution the ammunition they need. Pardon, that was unintentional, but this gives them what they need to refile the charges against Baldwin. I am hopeful that they will do so. I think that he should face his charges. There's still going to be a tough challenge in terms of overcoming this at the jury, but this, I think, does the groundwork for putting Baldwin back, in the case, and then at that point, he'll have to run his full case, and maybe he gets acquitted, maybe he gets convicted. We don't know. So anyway, I think this is a really important update and a really interesting bit of news. So wanted to share that with you. I wanted to read it myself, and once I did, I was like, people need to see this. So thank you for watching. I hope you found it to be interesting and educational. So I want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level: CCFR, CAIM, Canada's National Firearms Association, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Jane Babin Luxor. And at the $20 level, Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Here's a Coin Legal Witcher, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Vicky, and Dorky Dane. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.